Hey guys, it's Jackie. Welcome back to my channel. So this is a video I've wanted to do for a while, or well, a series of videos really, which is a tarot collection series, just because I've been wanting to do this for a minute again, and because it's October and we're rapidly approaching Samhain, this did seem like the right time to go ahead and do it. So I am going to be publishing this in a few installments, the first of which is this video, which will be my fairy tale decks. I have quite a few. Fairy tale decks make up one of the largest chunks of my collection, honestly. And the reason that is because, again, I'm an academic. I do most of my research in children's literature and young adult literature, and I've always had a really strong interest in fairy tales and folk tales. Again, my wheelhouse of study is actually monster studies and the long 19th century. So I am really familiar with a lot of fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, the Grimms, Charles Perrault and the French tradition, as well as world mythology. I'm just kind of a fairy tale geek. So that's why there's a lot of fairy tale decks in my collection. I don't think that that's a huge surprise. So these are decks that are either, again, they invoke fairy tale imagery or fae energy. That in some instances they are retrofitted decks from famous storybook illustrators. So the three Llewellyn retrofitted fairy tale decks by John Bauer, Edmund Dulac, and Arthur Rackham, for example. Others, again, make references to specific fairy tales, while some others are just a kind of very general fairy tale-like fantasy energy. So I'm not going to keep you guys for too long. Let's just go right ahead and jump into the collection. Alright, so the first deck I wanted to go ahead and show you guys is the first of my three Llewellyn retrofitted fairy tale illustrator decks. This one being the Edmund Dulac Tarot, which all of the Llewellyn fairy tale decks come in these little, very flimsy, I have to say, tuck boxes. I'm not a super big tuck box fan. And mine arrived, as you can kind of tell, already damaged. So again, they're not very sturdy. However, I do like the art on these boxes so much in the case of the fairy tale decks that I do just kind of keep them for display anyway, and keep the decks housed inside of them. But they're not the best boxes. They do also come with the standard Llewellyn Little White Book, which not super in-depth, however, because the Dulac, the Rackham, and the Bauer tarots are all retrofitted from, you know, illustrations that are in some cases now over 100 years old. They weren't designed for the purposes of being part of a tarot deck. These little white books can kind of help you understand why the publisher perhaps placed what image in what position in the deck. And that's certainly needed, I think, especially with the Dulac and the Bauer tarots, where I feel like they're being retrofitted into an RWS system, but some of the choices are kind of creative and not at all in the RWS system, I would argue. So these can be actually pretty useful. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the backs. And these backs are, they're so lovely, this kind of cosmic horse imagery, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think that this illustration comes from the cover of one of Dulac's relief books, which a relief book during WW1 would have been a pamphlet or book that would have been distributed among soldiers. Usually adventure stories, fairy tales, things like that, just as a kind of morale boost. And Dulac produced illustrations for a number of them during WW1. Interestingly, during during WW2, all the W's, he produced banknotes and stamps for the French Resistance. He was French. I think he was born in Toulouse, but he was naturalized as a British citizen. And so he's often kind of lumped in with other British illustrators of the golden age of children's illustration, along with figures like Arthur Rackham, which the golden age of children's storybook illustration is this period of the 1900s, 10s, 20s. Again, part and parcel of the golden age of children's literature, full stop, that stretches from the 1860s until about the 1930s. And so he is very much one of the preeminent illustrators during this period, and has this really, really gorgeous style, mostly ink and watercolor, and a little bit, again, very ethereal, otherworldly. This is an illustration from his The Little Mermaid. The Tempest. He illustrated the 1001 Nights. He has illustrated the 1001 Nights. He illustrated fairy stories, mostly from the French tradition, although also from like Hans Christian Andersen. Number of works by William Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream, The Tempest. This is actually from his Beauty and the Beast. And just such a gorgeous illustrator. I really love this deck. The thing I don't like about the deck, honestly, is these borders. I think these borders are so busy. Like, they're so busy, and I feel like they really kind of, they crowd the artwork quite a lot in a way that I don't enjoy. It makes the image feel very claustrophobic. I'm not a big fan of the borders on any of the Llewellyn retrofitted fairy tale decks, unfortunately. Oh, there's my side card. But such a beautiful illustrator, really important illustrator. There's Princess and the Pea. So one that I'm very happy to have picked up, definitely. So that's the Dulac. All right, the next, the second of the three of the Llewellyn fairy tale decks that I do have is the Arthur Rackham Tarot. Again, comes in this little flimsy tuck box with very beautiful art on them, so I do keep them around. And this one I do quite like, quite a lot. So let me go ahead and show you guys the backs of these, if you can see, which this is a reversible image of Titania asleep in her bower from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Rackham, like Dulac, also illustrated not just fairy tales, but works by William Shakespeare alongside. I think Rackham is probably most famous for not just his fairy tale illustrations, but his illustrations of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. Usually with Alice, if you don't see the John Tenniel illustrations, it's usually Rackham's instead, not always, but there you see them quite a lot in editions of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And Rackham, from the same generation as Dulac, was British, is probably the most preeminent illustrator of the golden age of children's storybook illustration. And I mean, a little bit more experimental than Dulac. I would perhaps argue he was very interested in things like Asian woodblocks and let that kind of fuse with his flair for romantic nationalism to create a style that was kind of uniquely his own. I really love his Cinderella. She's so beautiful. And the thing I really like about Rackham's art, and that I've always quite liked about Rackham's art, is that it has this wonderful sense of texture. Mostly ink and watercolor, again, like Dulac, but it has this kind of, this texture, this grit, this very tactile quality that it feels quite dirty and lived in, and sometimes quite grotesque in a way that I find very pleasing. Quite infamously, I shouldn't say infamously, I suppose, just famously, Guillermo del Toro has spoken about the ways in which Arthur Rackham's work influenced the design of his own supernatural creations for films like Pan's Labyrinth. And I think that if you spend enough time poring over Rackham's artwork, especially his artwork of goblins, which are always these knobbly, gnarled looking little things, I think you could see the similarity between Rackham's work and Del Toro's design of creatures like the Faun or the Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth, for example. So one place that Rackham's art has endured into the contemporary is the work of Guillermo del Toro. But just such an important illustrator in the history of children's storybook illustration and fairy tale illustration. And a wonderful deck. I would argue that I think this deck out of the three Llewellyn retrofitted fairy tale decks, I think this is the okay, when I say the best one, what I mean is, one, the least offensive borders. These borders don't bother me as much as the borders in the other two decks do. Two, if you're someone who wants a more kind of straightforward RWS deck, I feel like the retrofitting here is the most successful. I think the Dulac and the Bauer, they take some more creative liberties, and so they become more intuitive decks. So if that's what you'd like, I suggest the Bauer or the Dulac. But if you're someone who wants a more straightforward RWS deck, I think that the Rackham of the three is the most straightforwardly RWS, I would argue. But such a gorgeous deck. Definitely one that I'm happy to have in my collection. Really briefly, I did want to mention that in my collection, I do also have an Arthur Rackham Oracle deck, which I do quite like. Unfortunately, it was produced by Duck Soup, who is a creator I am not supporting anymore. Again, this was purchased him before I learned about his response to criticisms over his Gollywog deck. Indeed, before I learned about the fact that he had even produced a Gollywog deck, which, as somebody who again, specializes in children's literature, knows quite a lot about children's illustration and these kind of nostalgia industries. I find the uncritical replication of just vehemently racist iconography like the Golly to be deeply troubling, because that's what the Gollywog is. The Gollywog is undeniably a racist caricature. It is anti-Black, it is anti-Indigenous, it is steeped in a long and storied racist history that is one that people seem to have a really hard time letting go of. And I was very troubled and disappointed with his response to criticisms, because there was quite a lot of pushback in the tarot community when he produced the Gollywog deck, and he was just not willing to entertain those criticisms at all. So Duck Soup is ultimately a publishing house I'm not keen on supporting anymore, which is why I'm not kind of showcasing this deck. All right, so the third of the three Llewellyn retrofitted decks that I have is the John Bauer Tarot, which comes in this rather wonderful this wonderful tuck box with one of my favorite of Bauer's illustrations. So if you're a horror fan, you maybe recognize this image. This image shows up in the film Midsummer by Ari Aster, of this princess kissing a bear on the nose. And if you've seen Midsummer, I think you'll know why that's funny. Kind of dark. That image features prominently in that film. The main character has a print of it over her bed, which makes sense. Midsummer is set in Sweden. It is very much steeped in Swedish folk and fairy tales and fascism and a number of other different things. And Bauer was himself a Swedish illustrator and a very prominent fairy tale illustrator, again from the same generation as Rackham and Dulac, but Swedish. So his work has a much more distinctly Scandinavian influence than obviously Rackham or Dulac's would. Most famous for, again, his anthologies of Scandinavian folk tales and fairy tales, Among the Gnomes and Trolls being the most notable. And these are the backs of this deck, which I have a lot to say about this deck, honestly, which I know a lot of folks do not like these backs. I do like the backs. I like the design. What I don't like, is the color palette. I really wish that this odd mint green had been swapped out for a cream or something a little bit more complementary to the cherry red, or that the cherry red had been replaced, because the cherry red is kind of a strange choice to me, because this deck is very, very earthy. Now, something I do need to mention about this deck, those of you who already have it probably knows that these are not the borders. So this was a deck that I really struggled with when I first picked it up, because of the three, I think this one fits into the RWS system the least successfully. It is a much more intuitive storytelling deck. And I have seen many tarot tubers trim this deck, just completely trim the borders away just to have these images, to use it as an intuitive or a storytelling deck. And I thought about doing that just because I really was not bonding with this deck, but I didn't want to mess up the backs. I do still kind of like them. So what I ended up doing instead was reordering the deck, and I just placed this removable washi tape over the borders and just put the number and suit as I saw fit, which it is color coded by suit and by major and minor arcana. And now I really, really love this deck quite a lot. I feel like modding it and really getting my hands on it and poring over the images and assigning them to a position within the deck myself made me bond with this deck in a way that I am not bonded with the Rackham or the Dulac. So this is now, aside from my RWS Centennial Edition, my workhorse deck. I reach for this deck constantly. I really love it, which I just love John Bauer's illustration anyway. Again, such a wonderful illustrator. His art just really resonates with me. I don't know if it's because my family is Scandinavian or what it is, but there's just something about his work that really, really sticks with me. And something that's kind of interesting, a place where Bauer's work, beside Midsummer, has endured into the contemporary, is that Brian Froud, the famous fairy tale illustrator who designed many of the creatures for Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, has spoken about or mentioned that Bauer is one of his major influences. And I think that if you're familiar with the work of Brian Froud, Froud's fairies, or again the creatures he made for The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, you can see that if you spend enough time looking. So there is something about this deck that is wonderfully not only old world Scandinavian and lovely that I enjoy, but also kind of a little bit Muppety in a way that I find very nostalgic and lovely. That it does remind me of Froude's Fairies in a way that I really, really respond to and really like. Yeah, see, like if you look at like this troll, I think you can really see the influence that Bauer had over Brian Froude. So one of my favorite decks now that I've modded it. And yeah, that's the Bauer. All right, speaking of Muppety, the next one up is the Little Monsters Tarot, which was illustrated by Peony Coin Archer, Efflorescent Tarot on Etsy. I think this is still in stock. This is not the first edition. This is a later edition of, it's an indie deck, and this is a later edition. It comes in this very kind of sturdy cardboard tuck box, which it does also have the option. You can either get a digital copy of the accompanying book, or you can get a print copy. I didn't get a print copy, and now I kind of wish that I had, because I really like to have the books. I think it's still available, and if not, I would imagine Archer will be producing another edition, I would think, just because it's such a popular deck, certainly. It is, I love it a lot, but it is a bear. I have really, really tiny hands. I wear like a size 4.5 ring, and so trying to shuffle this deck, which is quite heavy and quite thick. The cardstock is that very nice, thick plasticine cardstock. Shuffling this is a task, let's put it that way. And I do really love these backs. This gorgeous kind of cosmic egg design, which I have seen that some people have trimmed the borders off and left this kind of original egg shape, which that does appeal to me just because it is so large in my hands. However, the thought of trying to do that and do it well kind of terrifies me, and I don't really want to mess up this deck because I do like it quite a lot. All right, and I say that it's Muppety because there is something about this artwork that does remind me very much of, again, the work of Brian Froude. Like, for example, this reminds me of a Skeksis from the Dark Crystal, and there's other creatures in here that remind me of the Mystics from the Dark Crystal. It has a very distinctly kind of Brian Froude, Jim Henson feel to it, that it's a very kind of sweet, whimsical, childlike fairy tale energy that I really respond to, again, because it does have this kind of sweet, innocent whimsy, but also because it has that kind of Brian Froude energy. It's sort of Brian Froude by way of Edward Gorey, right? This very kind of graphic ink and pen style. But I really like this deck a lot. I need to use it a lot more. But as a really super sweet energy, I really enjoy using this deck. I do wish it was a little smaller just for the sake of my little hand bones, but it is one I really do love quite a lot. Yeah, this one, I was looking for the sun. That one reminds me so much of a Mystic from the Dark Crystal, which makes me very happy because I sure would love to have a Dark Crystal tarot deck, and I think that this is the closest I'm ever going to get. So, all right, so that is the Little Monsters. Again, it should still be available on Etsy if I'm not mistaken, and you do have the option of purchasing a guidebook, which I foolishly did not do, and I wish I had. So, all right, this next one is one I've already talked about on my channel. I would say quite a lot. I say quite a lot because I did a flip through of this deck when I first got it that was like 56 minutes long or something really extra like that, where I just went through and looked at all the different cards and talked about all the different fairy tales that the cards represented. This is the Star Spinner Tarot illustrated by Trungles. I still really love this deck, you guys. The honeymoon phase it continues on. I don't know if it's ever going to end. It's probably my favorite deck of the year, although it does have some stiff competition that I will show you in just a moment. Comes in this gorgeous sturdy box that has this kind of pearlescent sheen. It's not exactly hollow. It's more like a pearl finish, which you can also, if the camera can pick it up, also see on the back of the deck. And I love this reversible back. Again, this very sweet starry sky. So I won't go into too much detail over this deck. I will link down below my initial flip through where I just ranted about how wonderful I found this deck for 56 minutes. But it is an incredible deck. It is a fairy tale deck that is very inclusive, very colorful, very bright, mostly dealing with Eastern fairy tales and Western fairy tales in the tradition of Hans Christian Andersen and the Grimms predominantly, although there are other global influences in this deck. It's just such a lovely, vibrant deck that I, as a fairy tale lover, just geeked out over so hardcore. I think that this deck is so wonderful. It has become one of my workhorse decks. I reach for this deck a lot. There's a little mermaid. She's so lovely. And again, very inclusive. It's an LGBTQ inclusive deck. It's racially inclusive. It is a very global deck. There's Sita from the Ramayana, for example. And I love the ethos of this deck. I love just everything that this deck is doing. Like, it's become one of my favorites. Oh, this is quite interesting. I'm glad I came across these. I wanted to mention, see, there's inclusive my beautiful sapphic mermaids, who I really love. But something that this deck does as an interesting conceit is that it includes 4 different versions of the lovers. It has this very traditional male and female presenting figures with the angel, so this kind of Judeo-Christian inflected lovers card from the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. It also has 2 male presenting figures, one that has a male and female presenting figure, but a little bit more androgynous, and again the apples are still here but a little less religiously inflected, and then 2 female presenting figures. And so you're free to kind of pick and choose which lover's card you would like to include in your deck before you shuffle it and lay the others aside. Such a wonderful deck. I will link down below again my 56-minute extra rant about how wonderful I find this deck. Wonderful packaging, great price point, excellent cardstock, vibrant, gorgeous illustrations. It's inclusive, has a wonderful little guidebook. Cannot say enough nice things about this deck. One of my favorites of the year, easily. This deck, you guys. So I just said how the Star Spinner was my favorite deck of the year, but now it has some stiff competition. That competition comes in the form of the Tarot of the Divine by Yoshitani. I love this deck so much. It is glorious. I almost did an unboxing. I still kind of want to do a flip through of it, honestly, just because I love it so much. I just didn't have time because I was writing my dissertation. I know I'm a little late to the game, but I would still like to do a flip through of this. It comes in this wonderfully sturdy box. It has wonderful sturdy linen finish cardstock. It has a lovely full color book to go with it. And I'm just kind of boggled by the quality of this deck for the price point, which I know other tarot tubers have mentioned, that for the price point, this deck is just extraordinary. I mean, it's like, honestly, indie deck quality that I would have anticipated spending, $50, $60 on this, and it's nowhere near that. So if you're looking for an affordable fairy tale deck, this is certainly the one. And the full color illustrated book does have the card, a little blurb about the meanings and how the meanings relate into the fairy tale that was chosen. It does mention which fairy tale goes with what and from what culture the fairy tale comes. It's an extraordinarily global deck. I feel that it's almost more global even than the Star Spinner. The Star Spinner is very, very global, but this one is just so comprehensively global that it's kind of mind-boggling. And if you do want to look more into the stories that are included in this deck, Yoshitani also published this kind of companion hardback anthology of fairy tales, which I had to pick up because, well, I didn't pick it up. My boyfriend got it for me as a birthday gift. But I just had to have this book because it does have full color, glossy illustrations, full page illustrations alongside Yoshitani's retellings of a lot of these stories. And if you're someone who really wants to dig deep into this deck, I highly recommend getting your hands on this book. If you like fairy tales anyway, I think this is a really excellent global anthology of folk tales that I sure would have liked to have had as a young person. I know that. So I think this would make a great gift for anyone who really, really likes fairy tales, but especially young people who are interested in folklore and fairy tales. So highly recommend the book too. But this deck, this deck, all right. So here are our backs, this wonderful kind of moon phase back. And oh, how I love this deck. So again, this wonderful kind of linen finish and just these vibrant, gorgeous illustrations. And again, like the Star Spinner, the Tarot of the Divine, this is such an ingenious deck. The placements and the assignments of fairy stories with these cards is so thoughtful and so well done. And again, so inclusive. It's an LGBTQ inclusive deck. It's a racially inclusive deck, a global deck, a body size inclusive deck. I am crazy about this deck, you guys. I really, really do need to just do a flip through at some point, just because I am so very in love with it. And again, tied at this point now. The Star Spinner and Tarot of the Divine are tied for my favorite deck of the year, because I am just so... And there's Sita again, the Crane Wife, Fenrir from the Norse tradition. We have Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Norwegian folktales, African, like it's Filipino. This deck is so global and so wonderful. Cannot say enough nice things about it. Highly recommend both the deck and again the tie-in storybook, because they're both, again, very intelligently rendered, beautifully illustrated, and the quality of both of them for their price points is really extraordinary. So highly recommend this set. All right, this next deck is actually the most recent acquisition into my collection. It arrived today. So I haven't really had a chance to get to know it yet. This is the Children of Litha, which I saw online and I just totally fell in love with. I've seen so many people's walkthroughs of this deck, and I just think that it's so glorious. It does come in this very lovely sturdy box. It's illustrated by Alexandria Huntington. It's available through her website. It does have this lovely full color guidebook to give you the meanings, along with some very interesting spreads like Litha's Wheel, which is a Litha exclusive to this deck. So I will be trying out some of these spreads. But oh, this deck, you guys, is so exactly the kind of fairy tale imagery that I really like. It has this really wonderful, again, kind of mystical fairy tale fae energy that was just so beautiful. The cardstock is very nice. It's this very kind of like rose petal finish, very sturdy cardstock. I love her. I love the High Priestess with her tentacles, the Empress, the Emperor. I am so looking forward to going through this deck and really getting to know it and use it. The Lovers. Where's my the Chariot? I'm waiting for my favorite card in the deck, Strength. I love this Hermit. I really, really love this Hermit card. I'm a Virgo, so the Hermit's kind of my card, and I really, really like this one. Such a gorgeous deck. Again, the quality of the deck I'm bowled over by, and the quality of the illustrations is really, really lovely. I should mention, hold on, let me go ahead and get to the minors. World. Okay. So the minors, the courts and the aces are very figurative, while they're not pips exactly, but they do something quite different than the majors and the court cards. They have more of an animal energy. So there's the Two of Cups, the Three of Cups, the Four of Cups. So we switch over from this kind of humanoid fae imagery over into this animal energy. And I quite like that. I'm very, very excited again to get to know this deck a little bit better. And I don't really have a lot of animal decks in my collection. Not because of any kind of, I don't know, dislike of them. I just don't seem to have that many. So this was nice to have one that is kind of a mix of both fairy tale and animal energies. I love this Queen of Cups. She's so, so lovely. So I'm looking forward to getting to know this deck. I'm so glad it arrived today on time, just in time to be included in this video. I was going to be so sad if it didn't come. So that is the Children of Litha. This is also a recent acquisition into my collection. This is the Hush Tarot by Jeremy Hush. This is also a retrofitted deck. As I understand it, Jeremy Hush did illustrate some new paintings to kind of round out the deck, but for the most part, these are images from Hush's repertoire that were kind of, again, retrofitted into an RWS deck. And I'll be honest, I'm struggling with this deck a little bit. It's a deck that I'm just going to have to read intuitively. I'm just going to have to kind of get to know this deck, because as far as RWS assignments, I don't feel like they fit very well. And honestly, even some of the explanations in the guidebook for, why it totally fits, I'm not totally sold on, I'll be honest, but that's always a risk with these retrofitted decks of sometimes it's kind of a stretch. And I feel like there are some cards in this deck that are definitely a stretch. That said, Here are our backs. I kind of wish that this design was turned this way so that the long end was the long end of the card, but that is so nitpicky, so just ignore my very anal retentive response to use of white space in a deck. That said, I had to pick this deck up just because the art was, it's so gorgeous. It's so gorgeous and has that wonderful, again, lived-in, dirty feel that Arthur Rackham's work has, that very textured fairy tale world that is a little grotesque, a little gritty, has, again, animals and fae living alongside one another. I love this with the headless wolf. Again, this deck reminds me very much of the stories of Angela Carter. Again, I'm not someone who's super into like gritty, dark fairy tales, but I do love me a good sinister, dark fairy tale in the way of Angela Carter, and that's what this deck ultimately reminded me of. And so it was a fairy tale energy I kind of wanted to have in my collection. However, like I said, I'm having a hard time bonding with it. I really am. And I'm going to have to just really get my hands on it and use it a lot and just read it intuitively. And just get to know it a little bit. I love this as the Two of Cups. I think they're lovely. Again, gorgeous deck, gorgeous artwork, very sinister artwork in places, or very dark, morbid artwork. I almost put this in my my dark shadow deck collection, which is again a forthcoming installment of this series. But ultimately, right, it's so fairy tale that I included it here. So yeah, you can really see, again, just the use of color that feels very Arthur Rackham. So I quite like that. So anyway, so this is the Hush. Again, got to get to know it a little bit better. Got to get to know her just a little bit better. But I'm optimistic. So that's the Hush. All right, so from one of my lesser used, newer decks to one of my older, very well-loved decks, this is the Tarot Sirène from Wandering Oracle, which I think that Wandering Oracle, I got mine on Etsy. I don't know if they're still available on Etsy. I think you have to go through Wandering Oracle's website, where I think they are like bundling the Tarot Sirène and the Marshmallow Marseille together for a discount price. I think that you can still buy them separately. I just think that they're doing pre-orders right now, so I think they're doing a new wave of these, or a new edition of these, possibly. Comes in this wonderful, sturdy, hollow box, this rainbow hollow box that's making my camera like go a little bananas. And the rainbow hollow is carried through to the back of the deck as well. You can see this really wonderful kind of this wave motif. And the Tarot Sirène is a Marseille style deck. It is all in French, and it's a mermaid deck. And I debated a long time whether I wanted the Tarot Sirène or the Marshmallow Marseille. Both are from Wandering Oracle. Both are they're similar. Because I couldn't justify buying both. I'm like, you do not need both. They're so similar, you don't need both, which, I'm saying that in part 1 of this 6-part tarot collection video. So, choices were made. This is my favorite card, the L'Ermite. I think this is one of the cards that kind of cemented that this is the one I wanted, just because I think that's so cute and clever. I did grow up on a beach, and so I really like watery decks. I love mermaid decks, so the Tarot Sirène seemed the right choice for me. I might still pick up the Marshmallow Marseille, though. I haven't decided. Because it is a Marseille deck, the minors are just pips, which they're such cute pips. The thing I really like about this deck, I think, is that it does have a very old world feel, but at the same time is still kind of colorful and whimsical, and I quite like that. So if you're someone who likes an old world feel, but maybe you're a little overwhelmed by the austerity of old world decks sometimes, I think that this or the Marshmallow Marseille could be a really nice compromise. Really one of my favorite decks, and I love how tiny it is. It is a very small, like pocket-sized deck, so I like that. If you're someone with really big hands, you might find that a struggle, but I quite like this about this deck. So that's the Tarot Sirène, one of my absolute favorites. All right, so the last deck I want to show all of you is one of my few Oracle decks. I'm not a huge Oracle deck person, this is one I recently picked up a couple months ago, Believe in Your Own Magic by Amanda Lovelace, with artwork by Janaina Medeiros. Amanda Lovelace is a poet whose work is often kind of fairy tale adjacent, so I did want to go ahead and pick this up just because I thought it was so sweet and lovely. Here are our backs, this kind of crown on this cosmic background. What I like about the artwork is that it is so colorful and that it marries fairy tale imagery with a very kind of contemporary feel. This is a deck that I use quite a lot. You see, this is what I mean, like Protest, Start a Revolution, where we have this castle and these figures outside of the castle. Evil Queen. I often use this deck alongside the Modern Witch Tarot. The art has a very similar vibe to me. This is a very lovely deck. It is racially inclusive, disability inclusive, body size inclusive. It is an all-female deck. That's just the energy that is being attended to here, which I have a couple all-female decks, although I usually call them all-femme decks, just like femme energy, not necessarily female, just because, I don't know, binarist understandings of gender don't really work that well for me. And I just think that this deck is so lovely. The artwork is really beautiful. Again, I like this happy marriage between old world imagery and contemporary imagery. I think it's very smart. The one thing I don't love about this deck, though, is the numbers in the corner. I really wish that those had been moved like down here, or was just a Roman numeral, or just didn't have numbers at all. Just because I find this very obtrusive for some reason. I just want to kind of enjoy the full illustration because this artwork is so lovely. So really, really pretty deck. If you're looking for an oracle to go alongside the Modern Witch Tarot, I think that this would be a really, really great choice, definitely. Comes in, again, this very sturdy box and has this very cute guidebook that, it's interesting, like it divvies the deck up into 3 different categories. There's princess card, witch cards, and mermaid cards, which I'm still sort of working through what meanings we're supposed to take from that, or at least what meanings I personally will take from that. I do like this. Aren't tarot cards and oracle cards evil? No, just no. It does have a couple spreads, an introduction to the deck and things. So really, really like this deck quite a bit. Haven't used it a lot yet, but when I do use it, I use it with my Modern Witch. All right, so that is it for this installment of the collection. I am going to be following up this video with a few more installments just because my deck collection has gotten ridiculous. It's gotten out of control. But I will be following this one up with an installment for my dreamy decks, so surreal, dreamlike decks. One for my classic decks, so kind of old world decks, Rider-Waite-Smith clone decks, pop culture and literature decks. I have so many decks that are based in pop culture, aesthetics, film, literary history, things like that. And then last, I will be doing my dark, spooky decks, my kind of shadow decks or horror-themed decks. Those seem to be the categories that made the most sense for this collection. But until then, I will see you guys later. Like and subscribe if you're interested in following along, overviewing this collection. And until then, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.